The wrench slipped from Andy Cole's oil-stained fingers and clattered against the cracked pavement. He knelt there, frozen, staring at the woman standing before him in designer boots and a leather jacket. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this forgotten corner of the city. Not at his tiny repair shop with its peeling paint and broken neon sign. And she definitely wasn't supposed to be crying. Andy had no idea what she meant. But he was about to discover that fixing her motor had changed everything. Before we continue, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Andy wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving another streak of grease across sun-weathered skin. 42 years old, broad shoulders permanently hunched from decades of bending over engines. Hands that told stories in scars and calluses. His small motorcycle repair shop sat wedged between a laundromat and an abandoned warehouse on the east side, the kind of neighborhood where people learned not to ask too many questions. 7 years had passed since Emily's death. 7 years since cancer had stolen his wife, his partner, his reason for believing the world could be gentle. The insurance money wasn't much, but it bought this space, these tools, this new life built from the rubble of the old one. He'd learned to cook meals that didn't come from boxes, learned to braid his daughter's hair, though it never looked quite right, learned to be both parents at once, which meant being neither one perfectly. But he'd survived. They'd survived. The morning started ordinary. Ava, 14 now with her mother's dark eyes and stubborn chin, sat in the corner doing homework, her backpack slumped against a spare tire. A half-eaten sandwich rested on a stained manual. She hummed softly, the same melody Emily used to sing while cooking dinner, and Andy felt the familiar ache bloom in his chest. Grief had become like weather, unpredictable but constant, catching him off guard in small moments. He was replacing spark plugs on a beat-up Honda when he heard it. The distinctive sputter of a high-end motorcycle running on fumes and desperation. The engine sound was wrong, not just empty tank wrong, but something broken inside wrong. The kind of sound that made mechanics wince because they knew the repair bill would hurt. Through the open bay door, he watched a sleek black Ducati roll to a stop. The motor gleamed like liquid midnight, completely out of place in this neighborhood of rust and survival. Chrome caught sunlight like diamonds. The rider dismounted with fluid grace, movement speaking of money and privilege. She pulled off her helmet, and dark hair spilled across her shoulders like silk in a shampoo commercial. Mid-30s, sharp cheekbones, eyes hidden behind sunglasses that screamed designer label. Everything about her was expensive, from her custom riding jacket to the watch catching light on her wrist. She belonged in glossy magazines, not here among broken dreams and second-hand hopes. Andy approached slowly, professional curiosity overriding his wariness of wealthy strangers. The motor was magnificent up close, a masterpiece of engineering that made his hands itch to touch it, to understand it, to make it sing again. She spoke first, voice carrying an edge of desperation beneath polished control. "I need help." He nodded toward the Ducati, already cataloging symptoms. "What's she doing?" "Dying." The word came out sad, almost mourning, like she was talking about more than just machinery. Andy walked around the motor, his trained eye catching details others would miss. Oil leak near the engine casing, fresh and spreading. Coolant smell sharp in the air, acrid and wrong. Temperature gauge reading dangerously high, the needle buried in the red zone. This motor had been pushed hard, ridden fast and desperate, fleeing something or chasing something, or maybe both at once. How long has she been overheating? The woman hesitated, and in that pause, Andy saw something flicker across her face. Shame, maybe. Or fear. I wasn't paying attention. I just kept riding. Andy crouched down, examining the undercarriage with careful hands. The damage was serious but fixable. Another few miles, and the engine would have seized completely. Thousands of dollars in repairs. Weeks of work. She'd stopped just in time, whether by luck or instinct. Ava looked up from her homework, curious now about this stranger who'd brought a piece of another world into their modest shop. Andy caught her eye and shook his head slightly. "Not now, kiddo." She returned to her books, but he knew she was listening, absorbing everything with that uncanny awareness she'd developed since losing her mother. The woman removed her sunglasses, and Andy saw her eyes for the first time. Brown, almost black, holding something that looked like sadness, wearing armor. Like someone who'd learned to hide pain behind expensive accessories and perfect posture. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror for years after Emily died. "I can look at it," he said, standing. "But parts for a motor like this don't come cheap." Money isn't a problem. The way she said it, flat and matter-of-fact, sent a small warning bell through his mind. People who said money wasn't a problem usually made it everyone else's problem. But the motor was beautiful, and he'd always been weak for beautiful machines that needed fixing. Broken things spoke to him in languages most people couldn't hear. Her handshake was firm, confident, practiced. Her palm was soft, unmarked by work or struggle. But there was something in her grip, a kind of desperate steadiness, like someone holding on to something solid in a storm. Like someone drowning who'd finally found a piece of driftwood. She introduced herself as Laney. Just Laney. No last name, no context, no story. And Andy didn't push because people came to his shop for many reasons, and sometimes anonymity was part of the service he provided. Andy rolled the Ducati into the shop with reverent care. The motor was a masterpiece, all curves and power and precision engineering. He'd seen pictures of models like this in magazines he couldn't afford to buy, but never touched one. Up close, he could appreciate the craftsmanship, the attention to detail, the way every component worked in perfect harmony. This was art disguised as transportation. Laney stood near the entrance, watching him work with intense focus. She didn't hover or interrupt, didn't offer unsolicited advice, or check her phone impatiently. Just observed, drinking in every movement like someone memorizing a foreign language. It made him self-conscious in a way he hadn't felt in years, aware of his worn clothes and grease-stained hands, in a way that felt uncomfortably like shame. As he began the diagnostic work, Ava appeared at his elbow. "Dad, I finished my math homework. Can I go to the library?" Andy glanced at the clock. 3:30 already. Time moved differently in the shop, measured in tasks completed rather than minutes passed. "Be back by 6 for dinner." Ava grabbed her backpack but paused near Laney, displaying the fearless curiosity of teenagers who hadn't yet learned the world could be dangerous. "That's a really pretty motor." Laney smiled, and something softened in her face, armor cracking just slightly. "Thank you. What's her name? I haven't named her yet." Ava considered this with the seriousness only teenagers could bring to motorcycle nomenclature. "I think she looks like a Luna, because she's dark and kinda mysterious." Laney tested the word, rolling it around like tasting wine. "Luna. I like that." After Ava left, the shop felt quieter, more intimate. Andy worked in focused silence, his hands moving with practiced precision born from thousands of hours of similar repairs. The problem revealed itself slowly, layer by layer, like peeling back skin to expose bone. The coolant system had a crack in one of the hoses, small enough to miss on casual inspection, but large enough to cause catastrophic failure. If she'd kept riding, the engine would have seized. Game over. Thousands of dollars in damage. "You're lucky you stopped when you did," he said, straightening from his crouch. "Another few miles, and you'd be looking at an engine rebuild." Laney leaned against the workbench, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold despite the warm afternoon. "I wasn't paying attention. I just kept riding, There was something in her voice, a hollowness that Andy recognized from his own darkest days. The sound of someone driving fast because stopping hurt more. Because motion felt like purpose, even when you had no destination. He'd done the same thing after Emily's funeral, driving for hours with Ava asleep in the back seat, just moving because stillness meant feeling everything at once. The afternoon stretched into evening. Andy ordered parts overnight, expensive even with his supplier discount. Laney didn't flinch at the estimate, just pulled out a black credit card that probably had no limit and handed it over like it meant nothing. Like money was air, abundant and unconsidered. "I'll need to keep the motor for 2 days," he explained, writing up the work order. "The parts won't arrive until tomorrow afternoon." Laney looked uncertain for the first time, vulnerability cracking through her polished exterior. "I don't have anywhere to go." Andy should stay out of it, keep things professional, fix the motor, and send her back to whatever world she'd ridden out of. But Ava's voice echoed in his head, the way Emily had taught her to see people, not circumstances. To offer help when help was needed, without expecting anything in return. But Andy didn't know that his simple kindness would soon unravel secrets worth billions. And that the woman standing in his shop wasn't just running from loneliness, but from a betrayal that could destroy everything she'd built. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog and possibility. Laney appeared at the shop before Andy even opened the bay doors, carrying 2 coffee cups and a bag of pastries that smelled like butter and sugar and expensive bakeries. The gesture surprised him, this billionaire playing at normalcy, trying on kindness like an unfamiliar coat. She settled onto an old stool, watching him work with that same intense focus from yesterday. The silence between them felt comfortable now, less like strangers, and more like 2 people who understood that some things didn't need words. Andy installed the new parts with meticulous care, testing each connection, making sure everything aligned perfectly. Laney watched the entire process, asking questions that showed she was actually listening, actually learning. Not just passing time, but absorbing knowledge like someone building an escape route from their own life. "You love this," she observed. He tightened a bolt, feeling the satisfaction of pieces fitting together correctly. "I love making broken things whole again." By sunset, Luna was running perfectly. Andy test drove her around the block, feeling the raw power beneath him, the way the motor responded to the slightest touch. It was a machine, built for someone who needed to feel alive, who craved speed and distance and escape from whatever ghosts chased them. He pulled back into the shop and handed Laney the keys, metal warm from his palm. "She's ready." Laney took them, but didn't move toward the motor. Instead, she stood there looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and grief, and a question she didn't know how to ask. That evening, Ava burst through the door with 14-year-old enthusiasm, face lit with some new discovery or social drama. She stopped when she saw Laney still there, reading the room with that uncanny awareness kids developed when they'd seen their parent hurt. Ava looked at Laney with her mother's directness, the kind that saw through pretense to truth underneath. "Are you leaving now?" Andy started to tell Ava to mind her manners, but Laney answered first, voice soft and honest. "I should. I have meetings tomorrow, important ones." She paused. "But I don't want to." Ava stated it as fact, not question. "Because you have the same face my dad had after my mom died. Like you're standing at the edge of something, and you're not sure if you should jump or walk away." Andy felt his chest tighten. When had his daughter become this perceptive, this wise beyond her years? Laney crouched down to Ava's level, meeting her eyes as equals. Something passed between them, understanding or recognition, or maybe just the acknowledgement that loneliness spoke a universal language. Ava turned to Andy with the determined look she got when she'd made a decision. "Dad, can Laney stay for dinner?" The apartment above the shop was small but clean, decorated with Ava's artwork and Emily's old books and photographs that captured happier times. Andy had learned to cook after Emily died, basic things that kept Ava fed and relatively healthy. Tonight, he made lemon chicken with rice and roasted vegetables. Emily's recipe from a stained card taped inside the cabinet like a relic of another life. They ate simply, conversation flowing easier than Andy expected. Laney asked questions about their lives, not prying, just curious, listening when Ava talked about her mom with genuine interest rather than the performative sympathy most people offered. She didn't treat grief like something to be avoided or rushed through, but as a natural part of their story. After dinner, Ava excused herself to do homework. Laney helped Andy clean up, moving around the small kitchen with surprising ease. Her expensive clothes looked out of place against worn linoleum and chipped counters, but her movements were comfortable, natural, like she'd been waiting for permission to be ordinary. "Thank you for this," she said, drying dishes with careful attention. "I can't remember the last time I had a meal that felt real." Andy understood without her having to explain. He'd lived that version of emptiness too, going through motions that looked like life but felt like performance. Acting human without feeling human, a trick that worked until it didn't. Laney set down the dish towel, decision crystallizing on her face. "Can I tell you something? I'm not just some woman who got lost on her motorcycle." Andy smiled slightly. "I figured." She laughed, surprised. "How?" "The way you carry yourself, the way you don't flinch at expensive repairs, the way you look at everything like you're used to owning rooms." He met her eyes directly. "Who are you really, Laney?" She took a breath, armor falling away completely. "Lainey Castellano. I own Castellano Technologies. We make security software, encryption systems." She paused. "The company is worth $3 billion. Andy absorbed this information, the scope of it making his small shop feel even smaller. $3 billion. It was a number so large it stopped meaning anything, became abstract, theoretical, impossible to grasp in any real way. "And you're miserable," he said, not a question. "Yes." Laney explained how she'd built an empire and forgot to build a life, how she was 41 years old with no one, no family, no real friends, just employees and board members and people who wanted things from her, who saw her as a resource to be mined rather than a person to be known. She'd gotten on her motor 3 days ago and just started riding. No destination, no plan, just desperate motion away from a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt like drowning. Andy poured them both coffee, silent while he processed this. A billionaire had broken down outside his shop, and he'd fixed her motor. It felt like fate making a point, the universe arranging pieces on a board for reasons he couldn't yet see. "So, what do you want to be?" he asked. "If not Lainey Castellano." She looked at him with eyes that held years of loneliness. "I want to be someone who matters to someone, not for what I can give them or do for them, just for who I am." The confession cracked something open in Andy's chest. He thought about Emily, about how she'd loved him when he was just a college dropout with grease under his fingernails and dreams of fixing motors. How she'd seen him, really seen him, and decided he was enough. Not his potential or his future or what he could provide. Just him, as he was. Flawed and whole at once. "You matter to Ava," he said quietly. "She doesn't ask strangers to stay for dinner." Laney's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall, and Andy saw her clearly then. Not a billionaire, not a CEO, just a woman who'd spent so long being needed that she'd forgotten how to be wanted, how to be seen as human rather than useful. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of loss and survival. Andy learned that Laney had built her company from nothing, working 18-hour days, sacrificing relationships and health and joy on the altar of success. She told herself it would be worth it someday, that the emptiness was temporary, that achievement would fill the hollow spaces. But it never did. Success just gave her better tools to hide behind, more sophisticated ways to avoid the fundamental loneliness eating her from the inside. What neither of them knew was that someone had been watching. Someone who knew exactly who Lainey Castellano was, who understood what her presence in this shop meant, who saw opportunity in her vulnerability. And that person was already moving pieces into position, preparing to use Andy and Ava as leverage in a game neither of them had agreed to play. 3 days passed like honey, slow and sweet. Laney didn't leave. She rented a room at the motel Andy had suggested, but she spent her days at the shop, watching him work, talking with Ava, slowly unwinding the tightness that seemed built into her bones, like rebar in concrete. Andy didn't question it. He'd learned that some people needed time to remember how to be still, to exist without motion or purpose, or the constant pressure to be productive. Laney was learning to breathe without drowning, and that took time. She helped around the shop in small ways, organizing parts, sweeping floors, making coffee that was significantly better than Andy's usual burnt offerings. She talked with customers, not as a CEO, but as a person, asking about their motors and their lives with genuine curiosity. People responded to her authenticity, sensing that something real existed beneath the expensive clothes and perfect hair. Ava took to Laney immediately, the way teenagers sometimes latched onto adults who treated them like full humans rather than children playing at maturity. They talked about school, about art, about the motorcycles Ava wanted to design someday. Laney listened without the patronizing patience adults often showed kids, engaging seriously with Ava's ideas, offering insights from her own experience in engineering and business. Andy watched them together and felt something shift in his chest. Not quite love, not yet, but the possibility of love. The recognition that his life could expand to include someone new without erasing Emily's memory. That healing didn't mean forgetting, just meant making room for new chapters in a story he'd thought was finished. On the 4th day, Laney started talking about her company, not the success or the money, but the original dream. She'd started Castellano Technologies 20 years ago with a simple goal: create security systems that protected people's privacy in an increasingly invasive digital world. She'd believed in it fiercely. That mission to safeguard the vulnerable against powerful forces that wanted to exploit them. But somewhere along the way, the mission had gotten lost. The company grew, and with growth came pressure from investors, from board members, from market forces that cared more about quarterly profits than original principles. She'd compromised, bit by bit, telling herself each concession was necessary, was temporary, was just good business. Now she looked at what she'd built and barely recognized it. The company that was supposed to protect people had become just another corporation, extracting value from users, selling data to the highest bidder, prioritizing shareholders over the individuals they'd promised to safeguard. I became the thing I started fighting against, she said quietly, watching Andy work on an old Harley. And I didn't even notice it happening. Andy understood moral compromise, the slow erosion of principles under the pressure of survival. After Emily died, he'd done things he wasn't proud of, taken jobs that paid well, but felt hollow, missed Ava's school events because he needed the overtime, let grief make him selfish in small ways that accumulated into larger regrets. So change it, he said simply. You own the company. Make it what you wanted it to be. Laney laughed, bitter. It's not that simple. But she didn't know how complicated it was about to become, because David Torres, her CFO, and the man she'd trusted to manage company operations, had been building his own empire inside hers. Skimming profits, manipulating deals, positioning himself to take control, the moment Laney showed weakness. And her disappearance had given him the perfect opportunity. He arrived on the fourth afternoon like winter wind, sharp and cutting. David Torres stepped into Andy's shop wearing a suit, shoes polished to mirror finish, expression cold and calculating. Everything about him screamed power and cruelty and ambition, wearing a civilized mask. His eyes swept the space with predatory precision, landing on Laney, where she sat on a stool, drinking coffee and laughing at something Ava had said. The laughter died when she saw him. "Laney." His voice cut through warmth, like a blade. "We need to talk." Laney's face drained of color. The coffee cup trembled in her hand. Andy stood slowly from where he'd been working on an engine, instinct telling him this was danger, walking in expensive shoes. Ava looked between the adults, reading tension with her usual perceptiveness. Andy caught her eye and jerked his head toward the stairs. She went reluctantly, but he knew she'd be listening from above, absorbing everything. David stepped fully into the shop, his polished shoes loud against concrete floors. He looked around with barely concealed contempt, taking in the modest space like someone evaluating property they intended to demolish. 4 days, Laney. You disappeared for 4 days. The board is in chaos. We have the merger signing next week." He paused. "What are you doing here?" Laney stood, but Andy noticed she put the workbench between herself and David. A barrier, protection. "I needed space." David's laugh was sharp, cruel, designed to cut. "Space? You don't get space. You're Lainey Castellano. You have responsibilities, obligations. People depending on you." "People depending on my money," Laney corrected quietly, voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Don't be naive. It's the same thing." David turned to Andy, dismissive assessment in his eyes. "Who are you?" "The guy who fixed her motor." David's expression showed what he thought of that. Then he turned back to Laney, done with distractions. "Pack your things. My car is outside." "I'm not going." The words dropped like stones into still water. David went very still, calculations spinning behind his eyes. "Laney." His voice lowered. "Dangerous. Don't make this difficult. You have obligations, contracts. The merger with Titan Systems depends on you being present and stable." He leaned forward slightly. "If you back out now, we lose everything. I lose everything." And there it was, Andy thought. The real concern, not Laney's well-being, but David's position, his money, his power that depended on her signature on certain documents. "Maybe it should be lost," Laney said, and Andy heard something new in her voice. Strength, certainty, the sound of someone finding their spine after years of bending. David's expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. He looked at Andy again, seeing him differently now, not as irrelevant, but as competition. "Is this about him? Are you having some kind of breakdown, slumming it with a mechanic?" Andy stepped forward, but Laney held up her hand. The gesture was commanding, practiced, the CEO showing through the vulnerable woman. "Careful, David." David's face twisted into something ugly, mask slipping to reveal the predator underneath. What he said next would change everything. Would reveal truths that neither Andy nor Laney were prepared to handle. Secrets about manipulation and betrayal, and plans that had been in motion for years, waiting for exactly this moment of weakness. But Andy would discover that he and Ava had become pawns in a game that started long before Laney's motor broke down outside his shop, and the price of Laney's freedom would be higher than any of them imagined. David's expression shifted into something colder than Andy had ever seen on a human face. "You think this is real?" He gestured around the shop with contempt. "You think playing working class with your mechanic boyfriend is going to fix the emptiness inside you?" Laney stood straighter, but David wasn't finished. "Let me tell you what's real, Laney. The merger with Titan Systems that I've been negotiating for 8 months. The deal that will make us the largest security company in the world. The contracts I've already signed in preparation because I knew you'd eventually cave. He smiled, sharp and cruel. The board votes I've secured to remove you as CEO if you don't cooperate. The air left the room. Laney staggered slightly, gripping the workbench for support. David continued, relentless. Did you really think you could just disappear? That your company would wait patiently while you had your little existential crisis? He laughed. I've been running things while you played absent. And I've done it better than you ever did. Andy watched Laney's face, seeing betrayal land like physical blows. This man she'd trusted, who she'd promoted, who she'd given power and opportunity, had been building a coup beneath her feet. You can't remove me, Laney said. But her voice wavered. I own 51%. David's smile widened. Owned, past tense. Check your stock portfolio, Laney. I've been very carefully convincing shareholders to vote their shares to me in proxy. All legal, all documented, all approved by very expensive lawyers who know exactly how to exploit corporate bylaws. He paused for effect. As of this morning, I control 52% of voting shares. The silence that followed was absolute. Andy felt it like physical pressure, the weight of years of planning and manipulation crashing down on this small shop. Laney's voice came out small, broken. Why? Because you've gone soft, David spat. All your talk about protecting users, about privacy rights, about doing the right thing. That's not business. That's weakness. He stepped closer. I've spent years cleaning up your sentimental messes, fixing deals you sabotaged with your morality. The Titan merger will make us billions, but it requires compromises you'd never make. Selling user data, backdoor access for governments, real money moves. Andy saw it clearly now. This wasn't about business. It was about power, about a predator who'd spent years positioning himself to devour the person who'd given him opportunity. So here's how this works, David continued. You come back, you sign the merger documents, you play the grateful CEO stepping aside for the good of the company, and then you disappear into a very comfortable retirement with a very generous severance package. His eyes went cold. Or I destroy you, publicly. I have emails, recordings, documents, showing years of erratic decisions and emotional instability. I'll paint you as a liability, a CEO who lost her mind and nearly destroyed a $3 billion company. Laney looked at Andy, and he saw everything in her eyes. Fear, grief, rage, and underneath it all, a question. What do I do? But before Andy could answer, David played his final card. Oh, and one more thing. David pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, turned it toward them. Security footage. Andy's shop. Ava walking home from school, unaware she was being filmed. Tragic, isn't it? How accidents happen. How vulnerable young girls can be in neighborhoods like this. Andy felt rage explode in his chest, hot and consuming. You touch my daughter. I won't have to, David interrupted, as long as Laney cooperates. But if she doesn't, well, I have connections in all sorts of unpleasant places. People who owe me favors. People who don't ask questions. Andy moved without thinking, hands reaching for David's throat. But Laney stepped between them. Stop! Andy froze. Laney turned to face David, and something in her expression had changed. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by steel Andy hadn't seen before. The CEO who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd crushed competitors and survived hostile markets and refused to break when everyone expected her to. You made a mistake, she said quietly. David laughed. What mistake? I've won, Laney. Accept it. You threatened a child. Laney's voice stayed calm, steady. You just confessed to conspiracy, corporate fraud, and extortion in front of a witness. And you assumed I stopped being smart just because I got sad." She pulled out her own phone, held it up. The screen showed a recording app, red light blinking. Every word David had said, captured. David's face went white. "You're bluffing. Try me." Laney's smile was sharp enough to cut. "You're right about one thing. I did go soft. I let sentiment cloud judgment. I trusted the wrong people." She stepped closer to him. "But you forgot who taught you everything you know about business, who showed you how to read contracts and exploit loopholes and play chess while everyone else played checkers." She tapped her phone. "This recording gets sent to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet the moment you walk out that door, without signing control of my company back to me. Your career ends. Your freedom ends. Everything you built on my back gets buried with you." David's hands clenched into fists. "You won't do it. The scandal will hurt you too." "I don't care anymore," Laney said simply. "That's what you never understood. I don't care about the money or the power or the company. I care about protecting people. And that includes protecting a 14-year-old girl from a man who threatens children." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then David pulled out his own phone, typed something, showed Laney the screen. "Transfer documents, signing proxy votes back to her, effective immediately." "We're done," he said, voice hollow. "But don't think this is over." "It is for you," Laney replied. "Security will have your office cleared by morning. Try to come near me, my company, or this shop again, and the recording goes public anyway." David left without another word, door slamming behind him like a coffin closing. The silence afterward felt heavier than the confrontation. Laney stood very still, phone still in her hand, body trembling with adrenaline fading. Then her knees buckled. Andy caught her before she fell, held her while she shook with fear and relief and rage, finally allowed to surface. Ava appeared on the stairs, face pale, having heard everything. "Is he gone?" Ava whispered. Andy pulled her close with his other arm, holding both of them. "He's gone." But even as he said it, Andy knew the truth. Men like David didn't disappear quietly. They regrouped, repositioned, came back from different angles. The threat wasn't over. It had just evolved. And none of them knew that David's plan had been more complex than a simple corporate takeover. That his connections ran deeper than anyone suspected. That his threat against Ava hadn't been empty. Just delayed. The real danger was just beginning. Morning light filtered through new windows in the expanded shop. Fresh paint on walls, updated equipment, a sign out front that read, "Cole and Castellano Community Motorcycle Workshop." Ava had designed the logo, a wrench crossed with a circuit board, old and new working together to build something better than either could alone. Andy stood in the training area, watching 3 young apprentices learn engine repair. Kids from the neighborhood who needed skills and second chances, who saw in him proof that broken things could be made whole. Laney had funded the expansion with her personal money, not company funds, keeping it clean and separate from corporate politics. Her company had survived, barely. The board tried removing her anyway, but the recording of David's threats had given her leverage. She'd negotiated hard, brought in new leadership, refocused on the original mission of protecting user privacy. It was smaller now, but more meaningful, built on principles instead of profit margins. David Torres had disappeared after his termination, leaving threats in his wake like landmines. But Laney had learned from her mistakes. She'd hired real security, implemented protection protocols, made sure Ava was never alone or vulnerable. The threats eventually faded as David found easier targets elsewhere. Laney herself had changed. She lived simply now, in an apartment 2 blocks from the shop. Nothing fancy, just a place that felt like home. She split her time between running her company remotely and working in the shop, learning to fix motorcycles with patience Andy found touching. She was terrible at it, all thumbs and frustration. But she kept trying. Most importantly, she'd learned to be still, to exist without constant motion or achievement or the desperate need to prove her worth through productivity. She'd learned that value came from connections, not accomplishments, from being present rather than being busy. Ava appeared at Laney's side, grinning. "Dad says you're teaching me encryption basics tomorrow." Laney smiled, genuine and warm. "If you're serious about engineering, you need to understand software too." They watched Andy work, his hands steady and sure, teaching these young people the same patience and precision he'd shown Laney when he'd fixed her motor, when he'd fixed her heart without even trying. That evening, after the apprentices left and the shop closed, Andy and Laney sat on the roof of the building, watching the city lights flicker to life like stars reflected in water. They did this most evenings now, these quiet moments that felt more intimate than grand gestures. "Do you regret it?" Andy asked, "leaving your old life behind?" Laney thought about the emptiness she'd carried for so long, about the endless meetings and meaningless achievements, about how she'd measured her worth in zeros on a bank statement instead of moments like these, simple and real and human. "I didn't leave it behind," she said. "I transformed it. Like you transformed grief into purpose." Andy took her hand, calloused fingers gentle against her soft palm. Two different worlds learning to touch without destroying each other. Luna sat in the corner of the shop, gleaming under security lights. Laney rode her twice a week now, but not to escape, to feel alive, to remember what freedom tasted like when you chose it instead of running toward it in blind panic. Ava appeared on the roof carrying 3 bowls of ice cream, interrupting the romantic moment with 14-year-old obliviousness. She settled between them, sharing her day's events with the easy comfort of family. Not the family Andy had lost, but the family they'd built together from spare parts and second chances. Later, after Ava went to bed, Andy pulled Laney close under stars that barely showed through city light pollution. "For what it's worth," he murmured against her hair, "I'm glad your motor broke down outside my shop." Laney laughed, soft and secret. "Want to know something? It didn't really break down." Andy pulled back, surprised. "What?" "I mean, it did, but I knew it was overheating. I saw your shop and something about it felt like shelter, like a place I could finally stop running." She looked up at him. "I chose you before I even knew your name." The confession settled between them like a gift. Andy kissed her then, slow and gentle, tasting coffee and possibility, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe around them. Two broken people who'd found each other in moments of desperate need, who'd chosen to stop running and start building, who'd discovered that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest act. One person fixing something broken and realizing that in the process, they'd fixed themselves. Ava watched from the window, smiling. Her mom would have liked this ending. New beginnings disguised as repairs. Love built from grease-stained hands and honest conversations. Family formed not by blood, but by choice, by showing up, by staying when leaving would be easier. She picked up her sketchbook and began drawing. Not motorcycles this time, but people. 3 of them, standing together in a shop full of light. A single dad who'd learned to love again. A billionaire who discovered that wealth meant nothing without connection. And a girl who understood that sometimes the best families were the ones you built yourself, one careful, loving piece at a time. The sign outside flickered in the evening breeze. Cole and Castellano. Not just a business partnership, but a promise. That broken things could be made whole. That people running from themselves could learn to stand still. That love could bloom in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people, when they finally stopped hiding behind armor and let themselves be seen. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it again. Fix motors, teach students, build dreams, together. Not perfect, but real. Not grand, but genuine. Not easy, but worth every moment of effort. Because that's what family did. They showed up. They stayed. They transformed ordinary days into extraordinary lives, one shared moment at a time. And they proved that sometimes the best treasures weren't found in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in small shops where broken things became whole again, where lonely hearts learned to beat in sync, where love grew from the most unexpected soil. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and share it with someone you want to hear with. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story.